What is your personal encounter with the paranormal? Ghosts, aliens, sleep paralysis, glitch in the matrix, etc. We joke about the girl who lives in our house. My wife insists that she was a victim of a fire in the schoolhouse in the 1870s that was on our property before the house was built. We've never seen her, but there is the occasional door locked or unlocked, or the errant attic light on, and so forth. Not a presence that is very strong or overbearing. There was one time though, when my wife was in the kitchen, and I was coming down the stairs, and we both heard "You're a good girl" Dottie coming from the living room. Dottie is our dog. Trouble but a good girl to be sure. Apparently there is one more person besides my wife and I in the house who agrees. This is kinda cute. I want a ghost that is nice to my girls. Not me but my dad. He grew up in a small village in Greece. One day on his walk home it was storming quite heavily. He was standing under a tree in an attempt to wait it out. As he's waiting, he's approached by a slow old woman who he'd never seen before. She had an umbrella in one hand and a walking stick in the other. She asks him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm waiting out the storm so I can go home. I don't want to catch a cold." She tells him, "You have a long life ahead of you. I would risk catching a cold if I were you." And with that, she starts to slowly walk down the street and out of sight. My dad waits for a few more minutes and takes her advice. He starts walking home. A few more minutes pass and he hears an explosion. He turns around and sees the tree he was waiting under was hit by lightning and blew up. Frightened, he runs to his home, hoping to bump into the old woman to thank her, but he never saw her again after that encounter. He's convinced she was a paranormal being, since he never caught up to her that night, even though she was so slow. He had never seen her in the village before or after that moment, and no one knew who he was referring to when asking around for her. Edit, changed mortified to frightened. Also, thank you everyone for the replies and awards. I won't be able to reply to all of them, but I'm reading as many as I can. My grandpa had a similar experience. He enlisted in WWII at the very end of the war when he was 17. And during his training he was at a firing range. He was standing off to the side waiting for his turn. Or maybe he was finishing up. Not important. A lieutenant he never saw before came up to him and told him very sternly, "You're not supposed to stand there. Move." A little flummoxed, he moved to a different area, and just a minute or two after he did, a bullet ricocheted right where he would have been standing. He never saw that lieutenant again. He figured he may have been saved by a legitimate guardian angel. That's so wild. Thank goodness for that though. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was on my way to Home Depot when I arrive at this stoplight. After sitting there about 15 or so seconds, the light turns green. As soon as it did, I felt like I couldn't move at all. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like if something was telling me to not go just yet. After about a second or two, this red Ford Explorer barrels through the intersection, running the red at what must have been about 50 miles per hour. IDK how much exactly, but it went ridiculously fast. After the car sped through the intersection, I could move again. I don't know what that something was, but had it not been for that, I would have probably not been able to tell you all this little story. Edit, holy shit, I did not expect to get this many upvotes. Thank you all for applying and blowing this up. My mum was about to cross the road one day. The light turned green for pedestrians to walk, but my mum saw a lady across the street. Her eyes got really wide, like something was wrong, and my mum just stared at her instead of crossing. A car sped through the lights, and just like your story, my mum wouldn't be here if she hadn't noticed that lady and stopped to stare at her. 1 week after my great nan passed away, I, 3 at the time, told my mum that I had seen her in my bed, and she had told me to tell my nan, her daughter, that she was okay now. I don't think I could even comprehend death. So spooky stuff. What was the response after you told your nan? I'm unsure, but there had to have been some relief alongside crippling fear. Haha. It's not something you expect a young child to come out with. For some reason it's common for kids to see spirits. Most kids grow out of it with no to little memory. It's extremely fascinating to me. Haha. I don't know if this was some weird coincidence, but when I was 14 I was staying the night at my friend's house and we decided to sleep in the guest room instead of her own bedroom. She kept telling me she thought the room was haunted, and I thought she was just trying to wind me up, but just before she went to sleep she mentioned it again. At that moment, everything suddenly went really cold and the radio randomly switched on and started making weird static noises, even though nothing touched it. My friend refused to sleep in there ever again. I'd be so dead. I wonder if something happened in the room from prior owners of the house. Question mark? Question mark? The house is pretty old I think, but it's been renovated in a way to make it look half modern, half traditional. However, the bedroom wall had a weird window that viewed into the living room right onto this portrait of man, probably painted at least 2 centuries ago, who had this really weird look in his eyes, and I remember my friend saying that she felt very uncomfortable looking at it. When I was 19 or so I had moved into my first apartment alone. I got all my furniture from the thrift store next door. They were pretty good finds too. My favorite was a pair of red armchairs that I'd often fall asleep in while reading. One night I woke up and there was a little girl sitting in the chair across from me. My lights were still on as I had fallen asleep reading, and I could move around, so I don't think it was sleep paralysis. She started playing peekaboo, and so I played back. When I removed my hands after the 3rd time she was gone. I did have sleep paralysis at least 3 times a week in that apartment, but it was nothing like that night playing peekaboo. Oh no, she got you. Mine isn't scary in the slightest, but I like to think of it as a weird glitch in the Matrix. One summer afternoon, when I was younger, my family heard the music of an ice cream truck coming down our road. Ice cream trucks never come down our road. We ran outside and placed our orders and expressed our astonishment to the woman inside. "Really?" she said. "I come down this road every week." "Sure you do," we all responded. She drove off, and we never saw her again. I'm sure it was just a mistake on her part, but I like to think there's an alternate reality where we get ice cream trucks down our street every week. We lived in the same house with my grandparents. I was almost 3 years old when I walked into the kitchen where grandma and my parents were just talking, and I said, "Did you see grandpa? He has just flew away." A few minutes later the phone rings and you can guess the rest. I don't really remember OFC, but grandma says that anytime she thinks about that, it's a relief, because it reminds her that there is something on the other side. I'm not into spiritualism or anything, but I'm glad if it helps her, and I think the story is kinda creepy. Stuff like this really makes me wonder about the afterlife. My grandmother came to my dad the night she died and told him she was okay. He found out the next morning that she passed. He also has a history with being able to see ghosts. When I was little, maybe 5, I would walk into my parents' bedroom to crawl into bed with them. Many times when walking into their room, I would see a young girl in a white dress standing at the foot of their bed. I would be paralyzed with fear, but being young I don't think I understood what I was seeing. I would take agonizing steps forward until I could crawl into bed and then cover myself completely in their blankets. She never moved, spoke or acknowledged my presence. She was just there. In my hometown in northern FL, we would sometimes get a thick fog that was terrible to navigate. I was always told by my grandparents that if I ever saw Confederate soldiers walking in that fog, keep my head down and move along, even if they talked to me. Rare advice for the South. As for Yankee soldiers, I was to nod and point them in a direction if they said they were lost. And if I ever ran into a woman in a white dress named Caroline, don't tell her your name and excuse yourself before she touches you. Wow, that's creepy. Any more details? Like what will happen if she touches you or you tell her your name? I don't remember all the details, but I was told that I wouldn't be able to find my way home if I talked to her. She was the ghost of a Confederate soldier's adult daughter, and one of the neighborhood kids disappeared for a couple days after she said she spoke to her. I don't remember exactly why she took the children though, but several kids did go missing during the fogs. My wife of 22 years died earlier this year. She was every bit the happy homemaker every day after I went to work, and she would make our bed like a soldier in basic training. It had to be just perfect, including the massive pile of throw pillows we had to unload every night and stack on a small couch in our room. During the last few months, when she became bedbound, I of course had to take over all the cleaning duties, which did not include a daily making of the bed. So the pillows remained stacked on the couch for months without moving. The night she died, I was awoken by the sound of a fan in our room being knocked over. I turned on the light and the pile of throw pillows, which had not moved in months, fell into the floor and knocked over the fan that was about 2 feet away from the couch. I piled them up back on the couch and got back into bed. I checked the time to see how long I had been asleep. It was 2:12 in the morning. My wife says February 12th. I've been married for far less than you had, but the thought of her passing away is too much to handle. Please be well. Okay, here's a benign one. When I was a kid, I was playing with a puppet in my brother's old bedroom. There was literally nothing in the bedroom since we were renovating. Just floors. I fed the puppet a Fruit Loop, opened its mouth, and the Fruit Loop was gone. Searched everywhere, but the damn thing ate a Fruit Loop, I guess. I've had a similar experience. I was only a few years old and had seen a lot of magic shows with people just putting things in bags and nothing being inside the bags after closing them. I tried said trick with a pillowcase and tried to make some marbles disappear. So I repeated as I saw in the magic shows, and nothing was in the pillowcase, even after shaking it. After I almost cried, my mother took it and pulled out said marbles with ease. Still don't know what happened there. Once I ate at Applebee's and both the food and the service was good at the same time. Truly a paranormal experience. Are you absolutely sure it was really an Applebee's? Oh gosh. What is the glitch in the Matrix chilly story? I need to find it. It's epic. I dreamed that my dad died, and I was the one having to tell my sister. I found my father dead in his house the next day. I had to tell it to my sister. That's so sad. I'm sorry for your loss. And I can't even imagine what that felt like to experience. I was trapped in a recurring dream over an extensive period of time, where I had to get out of a skyscraper. The top floors were more research based, while the bottom ones were centered around reception with things like art and sculptures on display. For a decent portion of time, I couldn't escape the building, but every additional time I had a dream, my previous self guided me past the place of my initial mistake. By the time I got out of the building, it felt like I had decades into the future. I had this dream for months. It was the exact same every time, except I got slightly further to escaping. I don't know why I would dream such a detailed place, but I remember everything about too. My grandmother passed away when I was 14. Shortly after, I was home alone walking through the family room. My grandmother always wore a specific perfume, and I've always been super sensitive to smell, so when I caught a whiff of it as I was walking, I immediately associated it with her. I think she was checking in on me. I was the only one in the house, besides my dog, but he wasn't the type to get into things, and we didn't have anything that smelled like that in our home. Also, I had a coworker pass away a couple years ago. The coworker was a part of a family who all worked at the restaurant together. A few times in the months after her passing, one of the fryer baskets would just drop randomly without anyone even being near it. My manager and I figured that it was my coworker letting us know she was still around. This is more glitch in the Matrix maybe. Years ago, I went to a friend's Halloween party, and right after walking in the door I saw this guy across the room. Immediately recognized him and thought, OMG, I haven't seen you in years. Waved in excitement, and he did too with the same fervor. After I made my way across the room and we began talking, I slowly realized that I wasn't sure I knew him. As we both tried to figure out where we had met each other, we realized we had never met and didn't have any friends in common. He was at the party somewhat randomly through an acquaintance. I thought it was just me with this feeling, but he swore he knew me too. After chatting for a bit, that feeling faded, and I had no feeling of familiarity anymore. Even typing this story out doesn't do the feeling justice. It was so strong, like revisiting a place you've spent a lot of time but haven't seen in a long time. Anyways, we figured out we didn't know each other, had never met, and were both somehow mistaken. I figure we must have been best friends or lovers in another life. I'm not really sure I really believe in past lives, but it was such a strong feeling that I've never felt with anyone else, and that I'll ever feel again, and cannot explain it all. Anyone else have this happen? This has happened to me too. When I was at college, I saw this guy in the cafeteria and just got this overwhelming, "Hey, I know you" feeling. He seemed to be looking at me the same way. So we started talking, trying to figure it out. We both recognized each other and couldn't believe we were meeting there. Turns out our paths had never crossed before. We spent the whole academic year trying to figure it out. He lived close to the college, and I started bumping into him everywhere in the town after that. It was almost like the universe was like, "You two, be friends." But we had some incompatible views. Never did see him again after college ended. I hope he's doing well. Hey PSSST, please subscribe and like.